Okay, guys, happy week 9. And happy weather, of course, right? So thank you for coming out. You can see that we are light on people tonight. So I'm going to cover radiography, the last couple bits first. And if you are in an area where the weather is not so fabulous, which I think is all of us, feel free to take off when and if you need to. No worries. My only advice would be to make sure that you watch the rest of the lecture when it should be available tomorrow late afternoon. So just make sure that you go on to Evolve and watch the rest of the lecture if you happen to go early tonight, okay? So welcome to week 9. And tonight we are talking about film and digital x-ray. And then we'll also do some professional development talking about resume, cover letter, and interviewing tips. So the last bit, just before we get started, you do need to have an updated resume that includes your dental assisting schooling that has translatable skills. And you need to make sure that you email that to me or to the school along with your assignment checkoff sheet once you complete all your exams. And that is how you get your certificate. So I will be talking more about that later tonight, but just in case, I just wanted to stick it out there. So note to self, you need an updated resume. And how do you know what to put on it? That's later tonight. We're going to talk about it. And then your assignment checkoff sheet. Now, we do have one class left, of course, but we're not going to do that till next year. So next year, on January 8th, we will have class 10. And if you can't make that, just remember you need to watch it. Make sure you watch it on Evolve. But hopefully I'll see you all here. All right, so I'm going to get moving because I know that we're all dying to get back out into the snow. So first we're going to talk about film-based radiography. And I lied. I am going to, let's see. Okay. Where am I going? Okay, we're gonna talk digital first, and then we're going to go into the film-based because there is something at the beginning of the digital that we really want to understand, and this is. Hold on, something is not. Sorry, guys. Hang on a minute. Where is my start off? Okay. For some reason, I must be dreaming. Regardless of where we begin, and I'm not entirely sure on why I don't have this. Okay, but we're going to start here anyways. Sorry. Regardless of whether we are using film or we are using digital sensors to pick up the radiation, the techniques are the same. So no matter what the sensor is or the media for recording the patient's x-ray is, it doesn't matter. We're still going to be doing the same thing. So last week we talked about how to take an x-ray, and we talked about the paralleling technique, and we talked about the bisecting the angle technique, which are the two ways that we produce either a periapical, a bite wing, or an occlusal in some cases. But those two things are how we get to the views that we need. So tonight we're going to talk about film, we're going to talk about digital, and then we're going to talk about extraoral. So intraoral is where we've been living, and intraoral means inside the mouth. Okay, so for some reason, guys, give me 1 second, would you? Okay, my apologies. So the objectives for discussing film include identifying the parts of the film packet, the process of developing the film that's inside of the film packet, infection control when it comes to taking the radiograph and dealing with a live patient, and then errors in the techniques. So there's a lot that goes with film, and my hope is that if you use film, you will love it as much as I do, but you may end up using only digital because many offices are moving to this, but we still have to learn the film. All right, so we place the film into the patient's mouth, expose it to x-rays, and on this film, before we process it, is what's called a latent image. And a latent image is like a fingerprint. So when you touch a glass, you leave a fingerprint behind, even if that's not visible. So the latent image in dental radiography is the invisible image that has not been made visible to us yet. How do we make it visible? We process it. Once we are finished with processing, we're going to place it into a film mount, and then the doctor will interpret or diagnose from the radiograph. Okay, so we have 5 sizes of film. We have 0, which is for little tiny munchkins, 1, which is used for the anterior in adults or for taking posteriors on children. We have size 2, which is for posterior PAs and bite wings. This is the most common size, and it is likely the size of the sensor that you're going to have if you're using digital. And we use that also for occlusals on children. And then we have the size 3, which is for bite wing only and is rare. I haven't seen one since the late 90s, so I doubt you, or the early 90s rather, I doubt you will see one, but you want to know that it exists. And it is only used for taking bite wings because it's rather long, and it just isn't useful in today's radiography. And then we have the occlusal adult, which is a very large film. But we looked at occlusals last week, and we know that they capture a great deal of information on this very large film. Okay, so you want to quiz yourself to identify the sizes of film so that you're familiar with them. And the sizes are here. The only one not pictured was the 0 there, and of course the 0 is going to be a little smaller than the 1. Okay, so what does a film packet contain? The outside is either paper or vinyl, and it protects from moisture and light. So it keeps the film safe from moisture, and it keeps the film safe from light. The next layer is lead foil. Lead foil reduces the scatter radiation, which means that when the radiation goes through to the film, that lead foil in the back catches some of the scatter. The lead foil also reduces fog to the film. By catching the scatter, it reduces sort of a gray shadow that you might see on an x-ray. The next layer of a film packet is the black paper wrapper, and this protects from white light. That's its only function. Then we have the actual film base, which is plastic. The plastic is coated with an emulsion, and the emulsion is what stores the image in the form of energy. So the emulsion that is on this, the plastic film base, is where that latent image is going to be. And then the last thing that's significant about a film packet is the right and left mounting dot. So you can see that this is an actual dot, and one side is a dimple and the other side is a pimple. And the correct way of placing a film in a mount is to have the pimple or the bump facing the reader of the x-rays. And I hope you've gotten a chance to at least locate those mounting resources, but if you haven't, be sure to try and do that. So the basics of film. The white side faces the tube, or the PID, or the radiation. So we say white to the light. The image is stored on film until it's processed, and that is the latent image. So you could actually leave a film that's been exposed for quite a long period of time before you would lose that latent image. So that latent image should stay there for quite a while. It is extremely sensitive to white light, so whether a film has been exposed or not to radiation, you want to make sure to always handle it under correct conditions to keep it away from white light. The film base is made of plastic, like we said, and it has an emulsion. And an emulsion, in this instance, looks like, or you want to think of it like, Jell-O with fruit in it. That's what I think of it like because it makes sense to me. So on the film base, we can't see it, but there is a thin layer of like a gelatin substance that has these crystals in it. And the crystals are in random order. And what the crystals do is they track the radiation and they store it. The crystals are larger if they're more sensitive to radiation, but their image that they produce is not quite as sharp. So smaller crystals take more radiation and give a better image, but who do we not want to have more radiation? Our patients. So it is appropriate for Elara for us to use F-speed, or the fastest film available, which is going to have larger crystals and be more sensitive to radiation. But we lose on image quality there. But the patient wins because they get less radiation. So we talk about film speeds by the amount of crystals that they have. So the speed is the amount of radiation to produce an image with the correct density. So a quality image. So the speed of a film, if it's very fast, has larger crystals, but doesn't take as much radiation. If it is slower film, like say D or E, it has smaller crystals, but needs more radiation to make it make that image, make that correct image. So here is another place where you can identify the film size to test yourself on them, and you will see right here, this is a size 3. So this is the one that you will probably never see, and it is very long this way. And I have the numbers on there and their uses to go back through for you. Okay, so how do we care for film? Well, the first thing is when you're storing it before you use it on a patient, you want to keep it away from heat above 70, so it should be stored at 50 to 70 degrees. Humidity should be low, so 30 to 50% low. Away from light, away from chemicals. You want to note the expiration date on the box, and during exposure, or when you have your patient in your chair and you're ready to take x-rays, you will then get the films out that you need. How do you know how many films you need? Well, it depends on what you're taking. So if I'm taking a full set of x-rays, I know that I need 18 to 20 films, depending on how my mount looks. So what I do when I'm in a new place, which will be your experience until you get some more experience, is I look at the mount, and that's how I know how much what I'm going to be taking, what I'm going to be exposing. So you dispense the films you need, you place them on a clean surface outside of the room, and you also remember that an exposed film looks just like an unexposed film to the naked eye. So we cannot see the difference between a film that's not been used on a patient yet and a film that has been used and exposed to radiation. So you have to have a system so that you don't inadvertently expose a film twice or expose a film not at all. So after you place the film in the patient's mouth and expose the x-ray by pressing the button, you then go in, remove the film from the patient's mouth, wipe it, and place it in a cup. So this way, all of your exposed films are in a cup, and all of your unexposed films are on the surface that you're working from. So that's how you can tell them apart, because otherwise you can't tell them apart. Some films come with a barrier around them, which you can see on this slide, and that's a great thing because the barrier keeps the saliva off of the packet. And so if we use a barrier envelope with your gloves on, you're going to take that barrier envelope off. You're going to drop the clean film into a clean cup, And then you have all of your exposed films that you can now touch with bare hands because they had a barrier on them when they were exposed to saliva. So that's a good thing. So remove your gloves, wash your hands after you complete the exposure. Carry the cup or the bag containing contaminated films to the processing area. So you can carry that cup that has contaminated films in it because the outside should not have been touched by you when you had your gloves on. And remember that used film packets are contaminated and you've got to handle them appropriately, which means don't touch a used film packet with bare hands unless it had a barrier on it first. That's been removed. All right, so what is this processing all about? What are we talking about when we're transferring it or taking it to the processing area? Processing is done with chemicals that are considered hazardous. They are subject to special chemical labeling and disposal requirements. You always have to have mask, glove, and glasses on when you are handling these chemicals. And you want to check with the disposal requirements specific to the state. And almost all states require us to recycle both of the processing solutions so that they don't go into the groundwater, which I think is everybody can understand because our water is precious. Okay, so film processing. Always think about, that creepy guy who is developing the negatives in the movies in the red light conditions. So why do they use that red light when they're developing photographs? For the same reason that we're going to be using red lights when we develop dental x-rays, is because they are safe lights. So dental x-rays are really sensitive to white light, but they are not sensitive to the red-orange spectrum of light. And so whether you are working with a machine that has a built-in loader, daylight loader, we call this, that filters out the white light, or you are working with a machine that does not have one, and you're in a dark room with a white light with a red-orange light that you can switch on, you're going to have a little bit of light to do this, but not much. All right, so what are the processing solutions? They are developer and fixer. These are the processing solutions. And they are always color-coded. Developer is always in a black, either twist off or labeled container, and fixer is red. And this is so that we can tell apart the containers and put them into the right containers in our machines. And you want to store them at 68 degrees away from light. You want to recycle them. Hazardous, fixer's hazardous because it has silver in it, and developer's hazardous because it has a really high pH, and that affects the wildlife and the fish and all those good things. So we want to use them to top off our solutions daily. So processing solutions evaporate overnight. And so every morning, if you're using traditional film, you need to make sure that your levels are up to the right level. And so we'll top them off or replenish them daily. And then we change and clean the tanks regularly. We have to keep records of tank changes or tank cleaning and chemical changes. And for manual processing, which is by hand, it is rarely used anymore. But if there's a darkroom, you need a safe light. Your solutions get changed and cleaned every 3 to 4 weeks. Manual processing is time and temperature dependent, so you need a thermometer and a stopwatch. The developer is always on the left, and the fixer, is always on the right, and both tanks will sit in a master water tank. So that when I'm working with what's on my left, which is the developer, I can go into the water that's in the middle and then back into the fixer, which is on the right. And the water in the middle is temperature controlled. So these tanks, and let's get a picture of this, sit inside a water bath. So the, if you ever thaw out like marinara sauce for frozen what do you call them? Mozzarella sticks. What do you do to thaw it out? You put it into hot water. So what happens is that whatever you put in the hot water begins to heat up, and this is the same principle. So you need, if you are in a dark room, you need dip tanks, which are what these are called. You need film clips, which are what these are called. You need thermometers and timers, and your order of processing is develop, wash, fix, rinse. And both the wash and the rinse are done with water. So developer, wash in the water, fix, and then rinse off in the water. And this is just for manual processing, which I don't know if you'll see, but it's a possibility. I had an office just this year in Worcester that was still using manual processing. So Worcester, Mass. So it happens. And this is what it looks like. Here's insert creepy guy, right? So this is like from every horror movie before 2000. And so your darkroom has to have good ventilations. And in order for quality assurance, meaning that everything is done well and our patient's films don't get ruined, because if a patient film gets ruined, we have to retake it. So we do a couple things to make sure that we have quality x-rays being produced. One is called the light leak test, which is as simple as standing in the dark and letting your eyes accommodate to the dark, and then seeing if you see any white light anywhere. And if you do, tape it up with black tape. Second quality assurance test is for the safe light, to make sure that the safe light is correct. So if you put a coin on top of a film and leave it there for a couple minutes, if the coin shows up, if the image of the coin shows up on the film, the light is not safe for x-ray processing. And sometimes that happens because the lights burn out. Safe lights should be no closer than 4 feet to the processing area, and you should be exposed to a safe light for no more than 3 to 4 minutes when you're unwrapping films in a dark room. And remember, a safe light is red-orange. And if you have either one of these conditions, either a light leak or the wrong safe light, you're going to get film fog, which is just like what it sounds like. It's sort of looks like you need fog lights or to get through it. Okay. So the good news is most of the places are using automatic processing. And so automatic processing is done with a machine that has rollers or tracks that are going to move the film through the solutions. It has a higher temperature than manual processing, so it only takes 4 to 6 minutes with drying time to process a film in the manual processor. In the automatic processor. The solutions are different from manual processing solutions. They work at higher temps, and there is no rinse in between the develop and the fix. So for automatic processing, we go developer, fixer, water, and then dry. Some have daylight loaders and some don't, and they have to be cleaned every 2 to 6 weeks. So let's talk about the individual solutions. Developer is very alkaline, which means very basic. It's not an acid, it's a base. And what it does is reduce electrons, which means reduces the silver halide crystals that have stored the radiation. It changes them to black metallic silver. So a chemical reaction happens when the film goes into developer. And the developer takes those electrons from the silver halide crystals that gained it from the X-ray, and it changes them to black, to a color we can see. There are two special things in developer that are called hydroquinone and Elon. And hydroquinone brings out the black tones, and Elon brings out the gray. And you will be asked questions about this on the RHS. And so I remember that Elon and gray both have the same amount of letters, and so the other one must be black. So developer brings out blacks and grays in images. And it does oxidize over time, so it becomes exhausted, it needs to be replenished daily to fight that exhaustion, and it needs to be changed every 2 weeks. Quality assurance, use a step wedge or a reference radiograph to measure developer strength. The practicalities of doing this in a dental office, never mind understanding doing it, are kind of like so 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So what I recommend, especially because you may never touch film, is that you take these bullet points as things that you need to know about this stuff for RHS. So how do I test developer for RHS? I use a step wedge or a reference radiograph. What does that mean? I have no idea yet. All right, so you can get some idea by reading further, but these are kind of your basic facts that you want to know. Fixer is the next step in a automatic processing. And fixer is an acid. So the film goes from a base to an acid, and the acid smells like vinegar. It smells like acetic acid. And it hardens the emulsion. So the film emulsion, the jelly with the gelatin with the fruit in it, if you'll pardon my analogies, gets softened up when it's in the developer. And then by the time it hits the fixer hardens it back up again. And what fixer does is it is basically an eraser. And it removes or clears the film of any silver halide crystals that did not change to black, which means that they were unexposed. They didn't have any electrons to give to the developer, so they were unexposed. And what happens is that leaves behind the white color of the film base. Fixer will actually erase an image completely if you leave it in for too long. And I've done this way back when. You would leave a film in the fixer overnight or over the weekend and come back and there's no fixer, no film left. So fixer also has to be replenished daily, changed every 2 weeks. And the quality assurance test for fixer is that it should clear a film in 2 minutes or less. So let me, at this point, just sort of sum up the developer and the fixer. So when we take an x-ray on a patient, we get either white or black or gray. And the reason that we get those colors on an x-ray is because either the x-ray goes through the structure, like air, is blocked by the structure, like metal, or is something in between, like a tooth or bone. And that's going to give us those different shades from black to white to gray on the film. So developer brings out the white tones in the film. Developer brings out the black tones in the film. Fixer brings out the white. So anything that blocks X-ray, does not allow it to get to the film, is then seen as white on the film because the fixer washes it away. And this takes, it took me almost 10 years to really get this. So keep working through it. Don't get discouraged. And when all else fails, memorize. All right. So how do you test an automatic processor to make sure it's working right before you put films in for the day? You are supposed to unwrap 2 unexposed films. Take one and expose it to light, and the other one leave it unexposed to light. Put them both into the processor, and the one that was exposed to light should come out black and dry. The one that was not exposed to light should come out clear and dry. If that happens, your equipment is working well, and you can go ahead and use it for the day. So with processing, we see many different errors. And these are not errors in technique. They are errors in chemical or processing errors. And the most common errors that we see are developer and fixer cutoff. And this is because overnight those solutions might evaporate and they get too low, and part of the film doesn't get into the solution. And so it either leaves behind a black band or a white band, depending on which one was too low. So it is important that we can identify errors and how to correct them. So this is a visual representation of different errors that we see, but we really don't see many of these anymore because we typically only see this with manual processing, which most people are not doing anymore. So you can go through this list and take a peek and see the different types of errors and what they look like. Typically, if you've got developer cutoff, it's going to be a straight white border, like this right here. If you have fixer cutoff, it's going to be a straight black border. So it's kind of the opposite of what they do. So developer brings out the black tones, but if I don't get any developer touching my film, I get this straight white border here. Okay, and this is the key to that slide before it and tells you how to correct as well. So it's important to go through this list and make sure that you're getting a sense for how these errors are. So this is part of your RHS study that you want to do. So a couple little things about film. We have a couple other types of films. We have duplicate films, which are basically two film bases in one packet. And most in the field call this a dupe. And we use these so that we can get two of the same X-ray. So we get a copy, basically. And it takes the same amount of radiation to produce one film as it does to produce two that are exactly the same in these little dupe packets. And if we use these, we're usually doing it because we need to send one of the radiographs to a specialist or send one to the insurance company. These are not as much used because digital is taken over, but that is a possibility that you will see them. So it will say two film packet. And then we have duplicating film, which is like making a photocopy on a Xerox machine or a copy machine. So duplicating film is used to copy an existing film that you already have. And there's no radiation involved. It is done with light, and it is seriously like making a copy on an X-ray machine. So, I mean, on a copy machine. So you take your you take your X-ray that you already have, you put it down, and then you place the duplicating film on top of it and expose it to white light. And it works in the reverse of X-rays, so the longer time that you expose a film to white light, the lighter your film will get. Okay. So the two things to remember here, longer exposure times with duplicating give you lighter films because you're using white light, not X-rays, and that your originals go down first on the glass, and then your dull side down, shiny side up to the using the film. I doubt you'll ever have to do this. This is what a film duplicator looks like. So the hardest part about most of these things is that you won't actually do them, but you're still required to answer the questions on them. So if you're feeling like, what? That's how you should be feeling. All right. The last part of the presentation is on extraoral film, or film that we use outside of the mouth. And some of you may have had panoramic X-rays that go around your head and then show you a whole big, nice, smiley face full of teeth. And we're going to look at those tonight. So I am going to come back to this part of the presentation when we look at our extraorals, because there's only a couple of those there. Okay. So we move on to the digital. And digital is fairly easy to understand, especially for all of us, most of us, who have grown up in the digital age or parts of the digital age. And there are two types of digital imaging. There's direct and there's indirect. And we're going to look at the two main types. We want to remember that regardless of whether you were using film or direct or indirect digital, we're still using an X-ray machine. So still radiation no matter what. The good part is that the exposure time for digital is 50 to 80% less than it is for film. And so that is the best way to comply with ALARA. So if we were to look at this in a way of what gives the patient least amount of radiation, digital first, and then fast film would be second. All right, so just to review, you have your tube head, your PID, your extension arm, your control panel, your exposure button. You want to be familiar with these pieces. So with digital radiography, hello? No. Advances in the computer technology have given us this filmless system. And what do you need? You need a computer and you need a digital sensor. The advantages to digital are that there's less radiation to the patient. The viewing time is within seconds. I think the slowest viewing time is like 2 minutes. Greater initial cost, but less equipment, no hazardous waste, no chemicals, no film, no lead foil. Lead is not a good chemical to have around, has to be recycled. Images can be colorized, they can be measured, they can be magnified with digital. There are 256 shades of gray that digital can be can bring to the eye, although we can only see 32 of them. Please don't ask me to explain that. And then we have contrast and density can be changed on a computer without taking another exposure. So the contrast and the density that we learned about last week, you don't have to take a new film with a different exposure time. You can just go ahead and use your computer to make the image different, which is a big deal. And then copies are easily emailed. All the originals are stored in the hard drive when it comes to digital. Disadvantages, the biggest disadvantage with digital is the size of the sensor. So the sensors are bulkier, they're hard plastic, they don't flex, and so your patients are fairly uncomfortable. However, that discomfort is fleeting, and what I mean is it doesn't last. And the other good thing is that they're getting less radiation. So a little discomfort for less risk is always okay in my book. The initial setup costs, as we said, can be $10,000 or more to set up a digital x-ray. So that's a lot of money. And so it's an investment for the practice because they will save it over time on chemicals and x-rays and things like that. The other thing is that the sensor has to be protected every time you take a film. It has to have a barrier on it because it can't be sterilized and it's going in the mouth. So that's something to think of. All right, so 2 types of digital direct imaging use either a solid state technology or a phosphor storage plate technology. And so let's just look at the different ways that we capture images. So film traps the radiation in a silver halide crystal in the emulsion on the plastic. Digital sensor captures the radiation using receptors that trap it. And phosphor plate uses phosphor crystals to trap the radiation. So an image receptor can be defined as what captures the radiation and converts it to a visible picture. Okay, so this is what these look like. So here's the digital sensor. Let me just get my pointer. Here is a phosphor plate sensor, and here's a dental film. So you can see that the sizes are similar, but this hard plastic is thicker by far than the phosphor plate or PSP or film. Okay, so when we're talking using the digital sensor, the sensor can either be wired or wireless. It has a CCD inside it, which is a charge coupled device, and it has an X-ray sensitive silicon chip with an electronic circuit, and it has an ordered arrangement of receptors, and the CMOS chip then converts the information to pixels. And when I look at this, I go, what? basically it's a USB that's connected to the computer. That's what it is. So a sensor just connects up to the computer with a USB. You always have to have a barrier on it, and it cannot withstand heat or being soaked in disinfectant. Some of them you can wipe lightly, but I wouldn't do that without manufacturer okay, because they're $5,000 to $10,000. So you don't want to destroy a sensor on your dentist. They'll be a little bit grouchy. All right, so here is my sensor, USB, plugs into the computer, and this is all the pieces of it. If you're interested, I wasn't, but RHS might want us to be. So what does it do? It basically, you place it in the mouth, you expose it to radiation, it captures the radiation, transmits it to a computer, we get an image. I don't ever pretend to know how computers do what they do, but this is what we're doing here. So here we're using the same RINs, we're just using different backing plates to hold the sensors because they're not film, so they won't fit into the film ones. So you just need a digital RIN, and remember our 3-in-1 that we like so much, and you're lining it up. Notice the plastic bag, the barrier, and off you go. Beam alignment devices are so necessary because of accuracy and also reducing the radiation. So remember that your color codes for this, red for bite wing, yellow for posterior PA, and blue for anterior PA. Remember that if it does not have a ring on it, it's just a film holder. But if it has the ring, then it becomes a film holder with a beam alignment device, meaning an accuracy meter, or like I say, the idiot ring. Indirect digital, or PSP, that is the second sensor that we saw back in that slide here. So this one here is the only one we haven't talked about yet. We've talked about digital, we've talked about film, and now we just want to talk about PSP for a second. When a PSP is exposed to X-ray, the phosphors on it glow and then convert it to a digital image by being scanned by a laser. So PSPs have to be put into a scanner first, and then the scanner uploads them to the computer. This is why it's called indirect, because you're not just taking a picture of the sensor and the information goes to the computer. You're taking the X-ray of the PSP and then you're scanning the PSP. And the PSP needs a special laser scanner to read that glow that the phosphor creates and make a digital image. The only benefit to using the PSPs is the fact that they are thin and that patients tolerate them well. So they tend to be easier to use than direct digital because they're so thin and so comfortable for the patient. They are reusable. So after I take an X-ray with a PSP, I expose it to white light, it erases it, and I can use it again on the next person. All PSPs are in special barrier envelope that keeps them away from light and away from saliva. So that's how they can be reused, because they're protected each time. You can get a lot of uses out of a PSP before you need to get a new one. So those are kind of cool. And they use the computer once they're in. So it takes away the films that can get lost, gets them right into the computer. But remember, there's an extra step with the PSP. They have to be scanned. So this is what it looks like. So here's my PSP. It's in a barrier envelope. I'm taking it out. I'm then going to put it into the scanner, which is kind of like feeding the Chuck E. Cheese thing. And then this is going to upload onto the PC. A note about digital, whether it is for sensors or PSP, you've got to have a software program, and that is another expense that the dentist has to have. So there are a couple popular software programs out there, and I'm used to using one, but you may end up getting used to one and then changing offices and need to get used to another. But basically, they all do the same thing. They allow contrast. They allow density to be changed. You can zoom in. You can do sharpness. You can do inversion. which I'm going to talk about in a second, or pseudocolor. And inversion, I don't know why I don't have a picture of it, but inversion is taking what's black and making it white, and taking what's white and making it black. Mind equals blown, right? You just learn about which way is supposed to go, and then we change it up. But that's what the computer can do. So you don't have to take a new x-ray. You just use inversion. You can also do pseudocolor, which means it will give rainbow colors to everything. It's really kind of fun to play around with images on an x-ray computer. And then the existing images. So if you have film and your practice decides to go digital, you might be tasked with scanning in all of the existing films. Sounds like a really good day, right? So anyways, you could do that. These are always copies. They are not as detailed as the originals. Okay. We've talked about informed consent documentation. We want to make sure, though, that we realize that legally the dentist owns the radiograph, even though the patient or the insurance company has paid a fee. So radiographs are part of the patient's permanent record. They have to stay with the record. You can copy the radiographs, but you should never give an original to a patient. And then the original always stays in the office. So just another reminder about documentation. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. Just don't forget that. Okay. The last part of the radiography is extraoral. And this won't take us too long. So extraoral, panoramic, cephalometric, and cone beam computed tomography are the three types that we're going to touch on tonight. Panoramic by far is the more common, and panoramic will have questions on the RHS, as will cephalometric and CBCT. So we want to be able to troubleshoot a little bit. The hardest part about panoramics would be identifying anatomy on them. And so that's the part that you're going to have to work at. But the rest is really simple to learn how to do. And this gives us great information about wisdom teeth, like these that are hiding in the back here on this patient, about impactions, and about lesions of the jaw. So we use this to do growth and eruption patterns, as well as fractures and an overall view of the maxilla and the mandible. So we don't say panoramic, we say pano or pan. We like to shorten everything in dentistry. And so I say, how old do you think this patient is? This is an advanced question that will require you to count teeth, and they're in various stages of development here, which is really kind of neat to look at. But this patient is 6 years old at least, because they have their 6-year molars. But they must be closer to maybe 9 or 10, because they've got all their permanent front teeth as well. But they're not quite 12 yet, because the 12-year molars are here. All right, so that's how you figure it out. I thought I put it on there, but I guess I didn't, of the age. So the age, I would say, is somewhere between, I'd say about 10. That patient's probably 10. All right, so they are not detailed enough to diagnose caries and periodontal disease or periapical lesions. So typically, we still need to take our bite wings and our PAs, as well as a panoramic. The good news is that digital is changing this. And digital allows us to use a pano for almost everything. And panos have less radiation than full sets of x-rays. So some offices will use a pano and 4 bite wings as their full set. The pano machine is different than the other intraoral machine that we use. So remember, this is extraoral, and extraoral is different than intraoral. What extraoral means is that the film is outside the mouth. So for the panoramic, you've got a tube head that you cannot adjust the vertical on, so none of this or none of that. It's already got a set vertical. The head positioner, which the patient puts their chin on, and then a notched bite block so that they know exactly where their anterior teeth have to go. Head guides so that they keep their head straight, and then exposure controls. The only thing you cannot change with Pano is time. So you can change MA and KBP, but you cannot change time. And you will either then have extraoral film in a cassette, or you will have an extraoral digital sensor to capture the image. So how do these things work? Both the tube head and the film rotate around the patient. The tube head is behind and the film is in front. If the patient is lined up in the ideal zone, which you can see right here, this is the ideal zone, then you will get a good Pano. If they are not, you get something that's distorted and blurry. And so we call this ideal zone focal trough or image layer. So the patient must be positioned in the focal trough or in the image layer, and this machine is set up to help you do that. So the mid-sagittal is the straight up and down here in the middle. This is going to be perpendicular to the floor, or making a T, right? And then the ala tragus line, or the Frankfurt plane, which goes from the tragus to the nose right here, that has to be parallel to the floor. So basically what you don't want is a patient like this, or like that. You don't want them like this, or like that. You want them straight. So here's the film moving in front of the patient. Here's the tube head moving behind the patient. Notice that the film is moving this way. They're moving the same direction, but they're moving opposite each other. So this is the focal trough or the image layer, the machine, and then they like to talk about the center of rotation with a Pano. This is kind of like advanced stuff here, but basically the X-ray beam rotates on the tube head side of the patient, and takes slices of the patient that puts it together as one film by the end of the exposure. We remember that they do not need a thyroid collar for extraoral films, and this is because it will block the X-ray. And we talked about our Frankfurt and our mid-sagittal. Your preparation should be the same as for any X-ray. You want your patient to remove all their earrings, necklaces, hearing aids, piercings, glasses, dentures, partials, gum, anything foreign from the face and the mouth. If you don't, you will get what's called a ghost image, and I will show you one of those. You need a lead apron without the thyroid collar. If you don't remove that, you will get a cone-shaped white area around on the lower. And you want the patient's lip closed. If you don't have their lips closed, you'll get a dark shadow over the anterior teeth. You want them to put the tongue to the roof of their mouth so that you don't get a dark shadow over the apices of the root. Here's a really nice Pano. And then you want the Frankfurt plane and the mid-sagittal to be in the correct spots. So if your patient's chin is too high, you are going to get blurry, magnified incisors. You're also going to get what looks to be a frown on the film. If their chin is too low, you're going to get a smile on the film and blurry, skinny incisors. All right. And so how I remember this is if you get a snobby patient, one with their nose in the air, you get a frown. If you've got a shy patient, you get a smile. That's just the way that I do it. So you can see that here I've got a frown and here I've got a smile. You want to make sure that the bite block, that the patient's teeth are right in it. If they're too far back, their teeth are going to look fat. If they're too far forward, their teeth are going to look skinny. And then you want them standing as tall as possible. The spine will be visible in the center of the film if they are slumped over. So you want the spine on the edges of the film if you have it anywhere. So there's the different errors that you can make with it, and some deeper explanation of this. And I would really recommend going through these because this is not, it doesn't come easy, this stuff. You can see in this picture the patient was slumped, so the spine is in the middle of the x-ray. In this patient, one side is turned away from the receptor. Here, we've got wide front teeth because they were too far back on the bite block. And here we have a beautiful panoramic x-ray. Okay, so then of course you knew somebody was going to say, so what is that? So here's the anatomy, and so there are numbers here and numbers here that go with it so that you can see what you are looking at. And I'll let you make your own key to this so that you can put the numbers. No, I'm just kidding. I would never do that to you. So here's the key for this. So what you want to do is you want to go through this, identifying as many things as possible, put the key up, and then do it again without the key until you've mastered what's what. All right, there's another one that has a key with it, just a different view, so that you can use to teach and test yourself this. So there is no substitute for the studying of the anatomy with this. So the last part of this, or one of the last parts, we talk about the cone beam technology, which is a brand new thing. It's not brand new. I mean, it's been around for probably 10 years or so. But more dentists are getting it into their offices. And I had the pleasure of watching one done on my mom a couple months ago. Fascinating, really. And the 3D cone beam is what this is, basically. It's a CAT scan in the dental office is what we're doing. And we're CAT scanning just the head and neck there. And you can see impactions. You can color the impactions. You can see exactly where the roots are of these. It's really very cool. And so we just want to be aware that it exists. And I believe the book does give it a paragraph or two. So the last thing is this film part, the extraoral film. So if you are using film to take a panoramic x-ray, there are two types. One is green and one is blue. Green is the most sensitive to light and is the best one to use. And green is called rare earth. Blue is called calcium tungstate. And they are processed just like regular dental films, meaning they need developer and fixer to bring the image out. They're supplied in a box of 50 to 100, so you have to have a darkroom if you're going to use screen film. Then they go into a cassette, and the cassette holds the film, protects it from light, and also provides an intensifying screen that basically intensifies it takes radiation and changes it into light, and the light is what exposes the panoramic film. The front is always going to face the patient and is plastic, and the back is metal, and it has an R or an L on it to signal right or left. So this is a non-digital panoramic. And the intensifying screens are coated with phosphor. Phosphor glows when radiation hits it. The glow is either in a blue or a green light, and then it will expose the film to its blue or green light. And if you're using the correct film, you get an image. So it is still not as common to do film-based, but we still have to study the uses for RHS. So we are done with radiology, and the only thing that I want to share with you is just that it's time to start studying for that and to be thinking about your plan for taking RHS. Remember, you've paid for RHS, you've paid for the Dale Foundation. What I think is the best thing to do is for you to let me know when you are ready for Dale Foundation, and I will order it for you. If you think that that's going to be a ways off, I'd like you to communicate that to me in some way. So probably in the next week I'll be sending an email out saying, just feeling each one of you out to see where you're at with the information and how your future's looking for taking this, because I want to be sure that you didn't put all this hard work in to not make it through to taking the RHS and passing it. So that's our job for you and I for the next little bit. All right, so I'm just going to show you the salary guide, and at this point, feel free to go home, man. I get it. I live an hour away from here, and I'm already stressing about my drive. So we're done with radiology, and you can take off or stay however you like it. I just wanted to show you this dental assistant salary guide that I just received in an email the other day, and it kind of gives you sort of, a overview of, and I know a lot of you do this, that how many openings are going to be available for dental assistants. We expect 58,000 job opportunities by 2024 to open up. And so the median salary you can see can go from 24 for entry level, but most are making more than that in general. And then up to 49 or more, depending on what you do and where you do it. So location, experience, specialty all make a difference. So find your specialty. Let me just, if general practices are the most common, but you may find you want to go deeper. And we're going to talk about specialties in our last class. Consider moving, depending on where you are. So that can sometimes maximize your earning potential. What definitely does is certification. So you get a couple extra dollars an hour for passing that test, and it really is worth it in the long run. So keep at it because the certification is worth it. And so here we have, so here are some of the states that offer the highest salaries. You can kind of go through here and look at the key. So it gives all of the states, but you want to look at that. So be patient. It does take some years to get there, but there really is some cool skills here. And so this I'll be posting up there as well on Evolve. All right. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start the job search now. And this is your sort of tutorial on how to make yourself marketable in this field. And this comes from me being on both sides of the table. So I have interviewed and hired many dental assistants in my career. I have trained many dental assistants in my career, both in an office situation and as a teacher. So I know a lot about what it takes to get into this field. And so I've put some of that into this lesson, as well as what the book, puts into it. But so we'll go through here. So there are many different places as a dental assistant that you can find yourself. And the way that you present yourself has a lot to do with figuring out what's important to you. So making sure that you have some kind of idea of what you want for a life goal, a family goal, an education goal, how they all fit together, and your professional goals. So private practice, corporate dentistry. Corporate dentistry is like Aspen, all right? Private practice is the doc down the street that owns his own practice, and they are two different experiences. So working at Aspen can give you great experience in the field. It gives you a very reliable set of parameters to begin your career under. And then in private practice, things are often much looser and less tightly defined. And so you may find yourself drawn to one or the other, depending on what your goals are. You can work for an insurance company. You can work as a sales rep for a dental company, dental supply company. You can work in public health. Government-supported nonprofit clinics are fantastic places to work, especially if, like me, you really have a desire to help others less fortunate. I find that public health really is a great place to be. Schools and hospitals, and then of course you can teach if you want to, which I didn't want to, but look at me. So life finds us in funny places, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I love teaching. So when you are seeking employment, first thing you should do is create a LinkedIn account, and I have a link for that. LinkedIn is the social network that employers look at the most, and so it's a good idea to have one, even if you very rarely go on and check it. So I don't go on to my LinkedIn very much, but I do try and update it occasionally so that it shows a true picture of who I am. An employment agency could be a starting point. Those are mostly in larger places, and they do require some money. And I've seen a couple of websites lately that are actually asking for you to join for a fee before they will show you the job posting. So that's a new and different thing. And net neutrality, right? So I guess everybody's looking to grab a piece of the pie on that. Academy of Medical Professions is a resource, so the school is a resource through me. ZipRecruiter, HelpWanted.com, Indeed, Monster, Glassdoor. These are all good search engines. And if you have not had a chance to type in dental assisting jobs in Maine, you should, and just kind of take a look at what's out there and what people are looking at and offering. Professional organizations and dental sales reps are also a place to network. And you can also use your own dentist. So maybe your own dentist is not where you want to work, or they're not hiring, but maybe the guy down the street is, and he's good friends with him. You don't know. So always make sure that you let people know. And we're going to talk a little bit about how do you let people know. Social media is one way. So working interviews. Working interviews have become more popular in recent years. And this is a good for both parties. Try it before you buy it kind of thing. Make sure that you are paid for the hours of the interview. And so a working interview, you go in your scrubs and you work. And you don't want to do more than 2 in the same office unless you're comfortable with temping. So I know some former students of mine who would be getting called back once a week to the same office for another working interview, when basically the guy just needed another pair of hands and was never going to hire her full time. So that's fine to do as long as you know what you're getting into there. Ask about hours, dress code, breaks, lunch, and lab coat. Pack a non-perishable snack. These are all things you should do on the phone or in person ahead of time. On your resume, be honest. Let it reflect your uniqueness. Try and leave out the I, me, my's, and use domain-specific vocabulary, which means speak the dental language. And you want to list skills from other jobs that you have had that translate. And I've got a bunch of them in this presentation, but some of those are customer service, responsibility, multitasking. You want your resume, though, when you're rewriting it for this, to focus on education instead of experience. Because you don't really have any experience, but you do have some education. And so that's what you want front and center. And when you pass RHS, you want that to really stand out and shine there as well. So this is a good anatomy of a resume, sort of a way of presenting it. And on page 5 in box 1-1 of your textbook, back in the first chapter, there is a list of skills that you can write on here, and you can put, if you feel that you can perform them, put them down. So there's a list of skills. So what skills do you have? These are some of the translatable skills that you probably do in your work, in your professional life already. If you haven't had a job, that's another story, and we'll work on how to make a good resume if you have not worked. But there are things that can translate no matter what. So we've got professional, adaptable, flexible. Do you have good hand-eye coordination? Do you have a lot of core strength to sit and stand? Can you work independently without direction? Do you problem solve? Are you acceptant of diversity and culture? Do you have good reasoning? I see I have hand-eye coordination on here twice, must be important. Ethics, self-evaluation. So all of these different things that maybe come from a different life. So spatial relationships and color. Maybe you do some paint matching at Home Depot. I don't know. But those skills are things that you can list that might not sound like they translate, but can actually work. So references. Get as many dated letters of reference as you can from your supervisors. Always ask before listing a person as a reference. And a good time to ask your supervisor for a reference is after a good week or a good action. So it's good to ask when you don't need it, and when they're feeling really, rah-rah about you. Yeah, and if you don't, if like some people don't have the time to write them or the inclination to write them, and it's a good idea to have a template. Write it up yourself, have them sign it, done. And that's one thing that you can always use. Soft skills. Who are you? How's your mental attitude? How do you manage time? Are you organized? Are you adaptive? Are you tolerant? These are all things that really come with dental assisting, but aren't something that we think about as much. The attitude, I think, is probably the biggest thing that will be noticed, especially on interview, and will get you in the door. So you've got to be positive, and you've got to smile. Once you do land the job, you want to look at the cues that your coworkers are sending. You want to dress appropriately, practice good grooming, and we've talked about some of these things. But tattoos, piercings, still need to be minimized as of right now in the field. You may find an office that's more accepting of them, depending on where you go, but I wouldn't uncover them until I've taken my cues from others around me. Hair extremes, I tell you, I have wanted pink hair for, I can't even tell you how long, too long. Can I have it? No. Because I can't exactly sit here with pink hair and tell my students not to do it. So you've got to minimize those extremes, and also think about perfumes. So a lot of people don't think about what they spray on themselves, but when you're working in close proximity to another person, allergies, things like that, scents can be irritating. So just stay clean. Gain energy, reduce stress. If your life is not organized so that you get 6 to 8 hours of sleep per night, realize that this is something that you're going to have to change once you land a job. Remember that, crap eating gets you crap energy. Plan at key times during your day to exercise, and smile and laugh. Make sure that you build some trust within yourself, because that is, like, when you trust yourself, people know this. So you may be unsure about what exactly you need to do in a dental office, but be sure enough in your ability to learn it on the job, and others will pick up on that. Also, always try and use first names with people. Be sincere with others. Ask to help and ask for help when you need it. Be curious. That's the first step to empathy. So finding out why people do what they do can help you to be empathetic, which means to put yourself in their shoes. Mirror the behavior of other professionals. So if your hair is in some vicious pineapple at the top of your head and you notice that no one else in the office is doing that, change your style. All right. So you want to mirror your behavior around others and develop awareness in a situation, because when you are hired as a dental assistant, you become the face of the practice. And so you want to do what others are doing. Manage and resolve conflict. Gossip and cliques in dental offices are huge. And so this sometimes can be a challenge. And so I tend to stay quiet until I know what's what. So impulse control, finding common ground, making sure that you don't throw out thoughtless words. Those are the biggest things you can do to begin to fit in to that kind of situation. I have a little bit here on the generations, different generations. So Gen Y or millennials seem to have a really good, close relationship with baby boomers because they're kind of like parental in a way, or grandparental. So just take a look at that. Different techniques. Bye, guys. Be safe.
You too.
Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome. Speaking and writing professionally, the best thing that I can tell you about this is to keep reading. Sound stuff out, keep reading. If you are someone who has slang and profanity in your work, in your words, you want to really work to eliminate it. Identify your audience, recognize cues that others are giving you. Leave behind a great record that shows your tone. Don't use emoticons, which really makes me sad because I love them. But be clear and informative, and leave your opinion out when you're writing professionally. So if you have a difficult patient that day, and you need to ask the doctor a question, speaking professionally would be to say, Mrs. Jones is on line 2, and she appears to be quite agitated. All right? Which means that she's not being very nice, but you don't have to say it that way. All right? So, and then writing professionally, rather than saying patient was a real jerk, which is your opinion, you can say patient hung up without saying goodbye. All right? So that leaves fact and not opinion. If you are on the phone in a dental office, which sometimes we are called to be, even though we're assistants, you want to make sure that your voice is clear and moderately loud. Rehearse the greeting. Sit up straight, smile, so you can hear a smile in the way people speak. And then keep your tone calm, especially with angry callers. And I would say transfer the call, arrange a call back with care. You want to be careful about putting angry callers on hold. Although you can disconnect if someone's being abusive. Interact successfully. So ask open-ended questions. Repeat the speaker's ideas. Ask for advice, directions, and guidance. Body language says it all, honestly. Most of our communication is nonverbal. So if you are rolling your eyes every 2 seconds but smiling, people are going to take the rolling their eyes cue a whole lot more serious than your phony smile. Confidentiality, big thing. Remember that anything you learn about a patient in a dental office has to be kept confidential. And this means whether you're on an externship or you're being paid. So even in a casual conversation, you do not want to repeat information to anyone that you hear at work. So it takes some training to do this because it's normal to want to talk about your day with others, but you want to be sure that you are not repeating confidential information. Being promotable has to do with having positive relationships and taking ownership, being accountable, being committed, and then bringing solutions with problems. So if you are having difficulties with something, propose a solution as well as bringing the problem to attention. Your personal strengths should be to control anxiety, practice patience, build your self-esteem, be resilient, which is able to withstand many different situations. Manage your emotions. I always say you get more flies with honey. So exude optimism. It will be given back to you, especially the longer you persist at it. Go forth and prosper. So prepare by rereading your resume. Arrive 15 minutes to an interview alone. So 15 minutes early by yourself. So it may be, you may think that bringing someone with you is good, but even having someone in the car with you can sometimes be noticed by people in the office. So don't go by yourself. Show that you're a big girl or boy. Don't disclose too many personal details. Close with a thank you. Send a follow-up letter or an email, and don't give up. So don't be discouraged if the very first time you try this, it's not successful. There will be times when you've got to keep trying. All right. So the first 10 minutes are the most critical between you and the interviewer. and this is when you want direct eye contact. Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. And many questions will be asked on both sides. Try to be honest and complete. Okay, so concluding the interview, I look forward to hearing you. Confirm your position, your interest in the position, and then make sure that you send a follow-up. Salary negotiations are never easy. I would typically, if I were to try and negotiate, I'd say 15 is a decent starting place, but make sure that you've got the $15 an hour. In most places, it all depends on where you are. But make sure that you've got an opportunity to revisit your compensation later. So, if the doctor wants to say, well, I'll try you out, but I'm only going to give you $12 an hour. Well, that might be enough to get your experience, and it might be worth it to you for a little while, but you want to be sure that in 30 days you have the ability to move up if you're meeting expectations. There's just an example of a thank you. So give acceptance and expect it in return. Be the best you can be, and be respectful of others. Be open to learning what's out there put in front of you. Smile to break barriers. Breathe deeply when you're stressed. It takes 21 days to develop a new habit. So you want, if there are things that you've noticed throughout this that you think you might need to work on, start now. Adjust your self-talk, which means that if you are always telling yourself, oh, I'm so stupid, oh, I'm such a loser, those things stick in your brain, and you do not want to do that. So if you are someone who tends to self-talk in a bad way, you want to kind of say to yourself, I can do this. Replace it with something positive. Have plans in place, dress appropriately, and if you do these things, this will open doors for you at work as well as in your personal life. And I know this from experience because I used to be a really grouchy dentist, and now I'm a happy teacher. So it all depends on your perspective, I guess. So you're special. Act as if you are the person that you've always wanted to be, and you'll be surprised at how quickly you can get there. So that is that part of it. The very last are some resume tips. And most of these in here are useful when you're actually writing it. So to listen to, probably not so exciting. But there are some tips in here that can help. You want to make sure that your font is 10 to 14 point and is either Arial, Calibri, or Times New Roman. You want stuff that is pretty boring. Clarify your career objectives and goals. Your personal information should be at bold and at center at the top of the page. Do not ever include your date of birth, your marital status, your social security number. I have seen resumes with pictures. I don't have a huge issue with them, but I know that some say that the pictures are unnecessary, and that they could influence the reader of the resume. So leave the picture off. Chronological format is what you want your most recent things to the top. And especially for us where we don't have a lot of experience in the field, we want our education and the skills that we think we can perform first and center. Any honors and awards that you have, any professional experience that you have, any volunteer work you've done, any other meetings and memberships that you have, all of those things can go a long way to convincing the reader of your resume that you're a professional person. So even if they don't have to do with dentistry, get them down. Writing it, some active words here that you can use. So here's a list of some verbs that you can use to sort of tout yourself or talk yourself up. Some common mistakes are poor grammar or spelling. Make sure you have somebody proofread this for you. TMI is another issue. That's too much information. overstating your experience, or things that are generic. So just make sure that you are looking through this. I've got an example here that can help you to begin to flesh out your resume. So there's lots of resources here. You can use a web-based resume builder, although I find those take a lot more time typically than just doing it. So there aren't a lot of shortcuts to this. You just got to do it. If you have a resume that is almost there and you just want me to take a look at it, feel free to email me. I will not probably get back to you right away, but I will definitely take a look at it. So I have a couple weeks now before I see you again, and we can certainly do that. So if you've got a resume, shoot it out to me. We can troubleshoot it together. Talking about cover letters are important. They're probably, for me at least, one of the hardest parts about an application. So my resume is done. I can send that off. But the cover letter really should be tailored specifically to the job that you're applying for. And it should stand on its own. It should entice the reader to read it. So at the risk of sounding like your high school English teacher, no more than one page. Make connections and make sure that you pull the reader in and articulate what you need them to know about you. Clearly state the job you're applying for. State how you learned about it. If you are just sending a cover letter cold, meaning that you don't know if they're hiring, you can state this in the paragraph. Sell yourself. Use some keywords from chapter 2. Sorry, not chapter 2. That's a different book. Use some keywords. I'll have to fix that. I don't know why that's there. Chapter 1 has our keywords. What value do you bring? You want to keep it away from the I statements and keep it towards the sort of statements that say, as a dental assistant in your practice, I would be an excellent communicator with the lab, that kind of thing. So you do have to use the I a couple places, but you want to try and keep it as neutral as possible while still bringing the reader in. Thank the employer. Close with sincerely, or you can go for best regards or warm regards, but only if you've met them before. And then make sure that you sign it. So creating a digital signature is a good idea so that you can just pop it right in. You can do that with Word. You can create a digital signature with Word. You can copy one in Paint and put it in. There are many different ways to do it. So if you're unsure, I can help you with that. So tailor it to the job description. That's one of the best ways to write the cover letter, is to look at the job description and qualifications and then plug yourself into each one of those. Make sure you proofread it. When you're emailing cover letters and resumes, send them in PDF unless you're sending them to me and you want me to do some editing. That's a different story. But when you're sending them to a company, PDF is the best because it's protective. It keeps people from being able to edit unless there are editable areas. Email text should include a brief explanation that you're excited to and thank them, and that what you've attached. Some common mistakes. Don't be long-winded like me. Don't repeat. Don't state things that you don't have. Or things that you have that don't match their needs. And don't start all sentences with I. These are some things that can help you. And so the last part about this is, I would say, develop what's called an elevator pitch, which means that if you were in an elevator with someone and you had 30 seconds to convince them that you were the person that they were looking for. Or I say, what do you say when somebody asks about you? So what do you, so when people ask about me, when I say I'm a teacher, they say, oh, really, what do you teach? And I say, I teach dental assistants, to make their way into the dental field. And I even have some assistants who have gone on to become doctors, which is true. And it sort of makes people go, huh, I have many people who say to me, I didn't even know that was a thing. So there you go. You can develop your pitch and use it wherever you might be stuck networking with someone, like your own dentist chair. So if you haven't had a cleaning, go and get one and do a little networking there. All right. Have a great night, everybody.